10 years of marriage, and Gavin never gave me a gift without a hidden agenda. But this first-class ticket to Paris was wrapped in suspicion. He thought sending me 30,000 feet up would clear the way for his mistress. He forgot that I hold the deed to everything he claims is his. The taxi I hailed did not go to the airport. It went straight to the address he thought was his secret sanctuary. My name is Lydia Thorne, and for the last decade, I have been the architect of my own life. Or so I thought. The morning sun sliced through the tempered glass of our Manhattan penthouse, illuminating the marble dining table where Gavin was arranging breakfast with a meticulousness that felt foreign. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, exposing the Patek Philippe watch I had given him for our anniversary. The smile plastered on his face was radiant, the kind of expression an actor wears when he is trying too hard to play the role of a perfect husband. The air was thick with the aroma of fresh Arabica coffee and the scent of white lilies, a tableau so aggressively wholesome that my stomach twisted with an invisible, gnawing anxiety. "Good morning, my queen," Gavin said. His voice was warm, echoing slightly in the vast kitchen, but his eyes slid past my shoulder, artfully avoiding a direct gaze. He pulled out a chair for me, his movements fluid and polite, but as I sat, I could hear the rhythm of his breathing. It was a fraction too fast, the shallow respiration of a man trying to mask his nerves before a major performance. I smiled back at him, a reflex, while my hand beneath the silk table runner clenched into a tight fist, my fingernails digging into my palm to keep me grounded in reality. Gavin placed a cream-colored envelope embossed with gold leaf in front of me. Inside lay a first-class ticket to Paris and a voucher for a 10-day stay at the legendary Ritz. He reached out and took my hand, his thumb brushing softly over my knuckles. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, telling me how I had been working myself into the ground for Sterling and Paulton and how I deserved absolute relaxation. His words flowed like honey, sweet and viscous, but beneath the sugar, I smelled the distinct stench of calculation. It was the scent of a plan that had been orchestrated with surgical precision to remove me from the board. 10 days, just you, no emails, no work, just wine and the Seine. He continued, painting a dreamscape. His eyes lit up with a strange intensity when he emphasized the duration of my absence. I looked deep into his irises, searching for a shred of the sincerity that belonged to the man I once loved. But all I saw was my own reflection staring back at a woman being deceived in her own home. My intuition screamed that this trip was not a gift. It was a temporary deportation order. I took the ticket, feeling the weight and stiffness of the expensive paper stock. I thanked him with a smile I had practiced thousands of times in the mirror for charity galas and boardroom negotiations. Inside my head, the scattered fragments of the past month began to snap together. The phone calls at midnight, the faint trace of unfamiliar perfume on his coat, and the sudden change of his phone passcode. This sudden generosity was the final piece that completed the portrait of his betrayal. When I stood up, Gavin wrapped his arms around me from behind. His warmth had once been my safest harbor, but now it felt cold and alien, like the embrace of a stranger. He kissed the top of my hair, whispering that I should go pack and promising to drive me to JFK Airport the next morning. I nodded, obediently playing the part of the ecstatic wife, but inside my chest, my heart had begun to hammer out the rhythm of an impending war. I walked into the expansive dressing room and pulled my Hermes suitcase down from the high shelf. However, instead of filling it with the glamorous evening gowns appropriate for Paris, I began to select practical, dark clothing. I bypassed my stilettos and reached for a pair of soft-soled boots that would allow me to move without making a sound. Next to them, I packed the compact recording devices and the small, high-definition camera I had secretly purchased the week before. A calm settled over me, the icy composure of a hunter preparing to set a trap within the beast's own lair. That night, I lay beside Gavin, listening to the steady drone of his snoring. It was a sound that used to comfort me, a sign of his presence, but now it sounded like the ticking of a time bomb. I stared at the ceiling, visualizing exactly what would happen the next day. Every step, every movement was already programmed in my mind. He thought tomorrow marked the beginning of his freedom. He had no idea it would mark the end of everything he owned. The sleek black Bentley glided down the highway toward JFK Airport, its engine humming so softly it seemed designed to lull any lingering suspicions to sleep. Inside the cabin, however, the atmosphere was thick with artificiality. Gavin sat behind the wheel, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the leather to the beat of a soft jazz track. Every few miles, he would glance over at me with a look of exaggerated encouragement, asking if I had remembered to pack my passport or if I had brought the right charger. I gripped the leather handles of my handbag until my knuckles turned white, answering him in short, clipped sentences. It took every ounce of my willpower to keep my voice steady and not let the trembling rage that was building in my chest erupt before the time was right. The terminal materialized with its usual chaotic symphony. Streams of people dragged heavy suitcases, lovers exchanged tearful goodbyes, and the disembodied voice of the announcer echoed off the high ceilings. Gavin pulled into the VIP drop-off zone, moving with a brisk efficiency as he unloaded my luggage. He guided me toward the security checkpoint with an attentiveness that felt entirely performative. He needed to witness me walking through those gates to ensure I would disappear from his life for the next 10 days. "Call me the second you land," Gavin said, placing a kiss on my forehead. To him, that kiss must have tasted of liberation. I looked up at him, memorizing the lines of his handsome face, etching the image of his hypocrisy into my mind for the final time as his wife. "I will," I whispered back. It was a lie offered in exchange for a lie. I turned my back on him and began to walk, the sound of my suitcase wheels rolling over the granite floor sounding like the grinding teeth of fate. I passed the initial security check, but I did not head toward the first-class lounge as he expected. Instead, I veered into a narrow corridor that led to a secluded women's restroom. Inside the cramped stall, I shed the skin of the trophy wife. I swapped my elegant dress for a nondescript black coat, pulled a baseball cap low over my forehead, and slid on a pair of dark sunglasses. The wealthy Mrs. Thorne vanished, replaced by an invisible woman ready to merge with the crowd and execute justice. I waited exactly 15 minutes. It was enough time for Gavin to believe I was safely ensconced in the lounge with a glass of champagne and for him to drive away. I pulled my suitcase and walked against the flow of traffic toward the arrivals exit. My heart slammed against my ribs like a war drum, and the adrenaline coursing through my spine sharpened my senses to a razor edge. I blended into the throng of passengers just disembarking and stepped out through the automatic glass doors, where the biting cold air of New York slapped me in the face. A battered yellow taxi pulled up to the curb. I opened the door and climbed in, the smell of old leather and stale cigarette smoke forming a harsh contrast to the pristine scent of the Bentley I had just left. The driver, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, looked at me through the rearview mirror and asked for the destination. I did not give him the address of my home. Instead, I gave him the address of the Obsidian. It was a high-end residential building in Tribeca that Gavin had been visiting frequently of late, under the flimsy pretense of meeting with business partners. As the taxi sped away, leaving the airport behind, I felt as though I was also leaving behind the naive marriage I had tried to nurture for a decade. I pulled out my phone and opened the tracking application I had secretly installed on Gavin's car. A small red dot was moving rapidly across the digital map, heading toward the exact same location I was. It turned out he was not returning to the office as he had claimed. He was rushing to meet his partner the moment he thought he had disposed of me. Sitting in the back seat, I opened the file my private investigator had sent me via encrypted email that morning. The photos were grainy, but clear enough to identify Gavin and a young woman with blonde hair. Her name was Chloe, a new intern at a rival firm, young, ambitious, and naive enough to believe that Gavin would leave his wife for her. I stared at the images, searching for jealousy, but I found none. There was only a cold contempt and an ironclad determination to bring the curtain down on this charade before the sun set. New York City blurred past the taxi window, a high-speed reel of gray skyscrapers that mirrored my own bleak, focused mood. My mind drifted back 3 months, to the first real sign. I was sorting his dry cleaning when a receipt fell from his vest pocket. It was from Cartier. It was for a diamond necklace I had never received. That receipt was the first hairline fracture, a tiny, sharp crack in the perfect facade we had so carefully maintained for our high society world. In the weeks that followed, I had become a consummate actress in my own home, observing Gavin with the detached eyes of a stranger. I remembered the nights he would sit across from me at dinner, his phone hidden in his lap, texting furiously. The blue-white light of the screen would cast a ghostly, guilty pallor on his face. He would chuckle softly at the messages, a private, intimate sound he had not shared with me in years. Each one of those giggles was a small knife twisting in my self-respect. The taxi turned off the main avenue and onto the cobblestone streets of Tribeca. The old, expensive red brick buildings rose around us, the perfect, discreet hiding place for the secrets of the ultra-wealthy. I remembered the night I finally traced the destination of his late-night meetings. It was not a client's office. It was the Obsidian, an apartment he had leased under a shell company, a love nest funded by an executive slush fund. He thought he was being clever, but he had forgotten one critical detail. I am the chief financial officer of the corporation. Not a single cent moves without leaving a trace that I can see. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text message from Gavin. "Miss you already. Have a safe flight." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it made me laugh. It was a dry, hollow sound that barely disturbed the quiet of the cab. I did not reply. I left him to marinate in his illusion, believing me to be thousands of feet in the air, harmless and oblivious. My silence, at that moment, was the most dangerous weapon I possessed. I thought back to my meeting with my lawyer just last week. She had been blunt. Without direct proof of infidelity, the prenuptial agreement was weak, and Gavin could walk away with half of my assets. But, she explained, if I had irrefutable proof of his adultery, coupled with proof that he had violated the morality clause and misused company assets, I would take everything. Today was not just about a broken heart. Today was about protecting the empire my father had spent his entire life building. The taxi driver slammed on the brakes for a red light, the sudden stop lurching me forward and pulling me back to the brutal present. I looked up, and my breath caught. 2 blocks ahead, parked with flagrant arrogance in front of the Obsidian's lobby, was his black Bentley. It stood out like a beacon of his betrayal. My heart tightened, not from pain, but from the cold, hard weight of final confirmation. He was here. He had not even waited for my plane to leave the tarmac. I instructed the driver to pull over on the next corner, out of sight of the building's entrance. I paid him in cash, leaving no digital trail of a credit card transaction. As I stepped onto the pavement, I pulled the brim of my cap lower, melting into the sparse afternoon foot traffic. The cold wind whipped at my face, but I did not feel it. All I felt was the simmering fire of controlled fury, the focused energy of a predator whose prey was finally in sight. I stood across the street from the Obsidian, staring up at the sheer glass facade. I wondered which window was theirs, if they were in there right now, laughing at the foolish wife they thought was on her way to Paris. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of the city exhaust, roasted coffee, and the metallic tang of the raw, unfiltered truth. I adjusted my coat and walked toward the entrance, not as a visitor, but as a reckoning. The lobby of the Obsidian was as luxurious and silent as a high-end tomb. Soft classical music drifted from hidden speakers, but it failed to muffle the sound of my boots on the marble floor, even though I was trying to move quietly. A young man at the concierge desk, his face a mask of professional politeness, looked up, his mouth already forming the words to ask my business. Before he could speak, I lowered my sunglasses, letting him see the cold fury in my eyes. I did not say a word. I simply held up the black VIP card, the one reserved only for the building's true owners. Here was the truth Gavin had never bothered to learn. My family's corporation, through 3 separate subsidiaries, was the primary developer and majority owner of the Obsidian. I personally controlled 51% of the project. Recognition dawned on the young man's face, followed by a wave of panic that turned his skin pale. He shot to his feet, fumbling for the telephone on his desk, no doubt to alert the building manager. I raised a single finger to my lips, issuing the silent command. My gaze was as sharp and unyielding as a shard of ice. He froze, his hand hovering over the receiver, and then, very slowly, he put it down. "Which apartment is Mr. Thorne in?" I asked. My voice was low but resonated with an authority that did not permit refusal. He swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to his computer monitor. "Penthouse B, ma'am," he whispered, his professional demeanor crumbling. "He went up about 10 minutes ago, with a female guest." That clinical phrase, "female guest," landed like a drop of acid in my ear, but my expression remained blank. I gave him a curt nod and walked past the desk toward the private elevator bank, the one that required the black card to operate. Inside the mirrored elevator car, I watched my own reflection as I ascended. I saw a woman dressed in black, her face set. I was no longer the wife who needed protection. I was the one they needed protection from. I pulled out my phone and, using my admin credentials, patched directly into the building's security feed. On the small screen, I saw the feed for the penthouse hallway. It was empty, but I switched to the camera aimed directly at the door of Penthouse B. It showed a pair of high-heeled red shoes, tossed haphazardly in the entryway. The carelessness of youth. The arrogance of a mistress who believed she had won. The elevator climbed, smooth and silent, to the 45th floor. My ears popped, either from the change in pressure or the suffocating force of my own adrenaline. I touched the small recording device pinned inside my coat, ensuring the light was active. Every second was being captured, documented for the legal battle to come. I was not here simply to confront a cheating husband. I was here to gather the final, irrefutable evidence to annihilate him in a court of law. The doors opened with a soft ding, revealing a long, silent corridor carpeted in thick, blood-red velvet. It was as quiet as a crypt. The air conditioning hummed, blowing a chill against the back of my neck as I stepped out. Each footfall felt unnaturally heavy, absorbed by the plush carpet. I walked the long hall to the black oak door of Penthouse B, the place where the raw truth of my marriage was waiting. I did not knock. I did not ring the bell. I slid the black card from my pocket, the master key of the building's owner, a key that could open any door. My hand trembled, but not with fear. It was the breathless, vibrating excitement just before the curtain is torn away. I held the card to the sensor. A green light flashed, and a sharp, electronic beep cut through the silence. I did not open the door immediately. I pressed my ear against the thick wood, listening. I heard the thumping bass of music, the light, flirtatious giggle of a young woman, and then Gavin's voice, that same deep, warm voice I had once loved. He was saying the same sweet words he had once said to me. "The witch is finally gone," he said clearly, and their combined laughter spilled out, piercing the wood, stabbing straight into me. I took one last, deep breath and turned the handle. The heavy door swung open without a sound, revealing a sun-drenched foyer. But the sunlight did nothing to cleanse the air, which felt thick and sullied with deceit. The cloying, sweet smell of Dior Poison Chloe's preferred scent. I noted assaulted my senses. It was a nauseating wave of cheap perfume trying to masquerade as luxury. unsuccessfully covering the rich, oaken scent of the penthouse. I looked around. The furniture, the art, it was all a distorted, less expensive copy of the pieces I had personally curated for our home, a bizarre, disrespectful mimicry. I moved forward on my soft-soled boots, a ghost in my own property. The living room was a testament to their squalid celebration. Gavin's tailored vest was thrown over a chair. Chloe's thin red silk dress was pooled on the floor like a bloody rag, and several expensive champagne bottles, all from my father's private collection, lay open and empty on the side tables. This was not just a mess. It was a calculated display of disrespect for me, for my money, and for the Thorne name that Gavin was so proudly desecrating. A burst of laughter echoed from the open-plan kitchen. I slipped behind a large, ornamental Asian screen that divided the living space, my heart a cold stone in my chest. From my hiding place, I had a perfect view. Gavin stood with his back to me, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Chloe was perched on the marble countertop, her bare legs dangling, kicking playfully in the air. The afternoon sun caught her blonde hair, creating a sickening, false halo around her head. Gavin leaned in and pressed a long, slow kiss to her neck, a display of raw hunger I had not seen him direct at me in at least 5 years. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened the camera app and pressed record. I centered them in the frame, capturing every caress, every possessive touch, every whispered obscenity they exchanged. I felt a strange, cold detachment, as if I were a biologist documenting the mating rituals of some lower life form, not a wife watching the end of her marriage. This emotional disassociation was the only thing holding me upright, the only armor that kept me from screaming. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Chloe's voice was a childish whine, her fingers tracing idle circles on Gavin's chest. Gavin let out a sharp, derisive laugh and took a sip of his drink. "Lydia, please. She's far too busy playing the ice queen at the office. She actually thinks I sent her to Paris because I love her. It's hilarious. I just needed her out of the country so we could be free to sign the contract tomorrow. Selling off the East Coast project data to our rivals is going to set us up for life." The words hit me like a physical blow, a cascade of ice water that extinguished every last ember of feeling I had left. This was not just about sex. It was not just an affair. This was corporate espionage, high treason. He was not just betraying me. He was planning to destroy my father's legacy, the company I had dedicated my life to. My rage instantly crystallized, turning from a hot, messy emotion into something cold, sharp, and precise. This was no longer a personal matter. This was a purge. I kept recording, zooming in just slightly to capture the smug, triumphant expression on Gavin's face as he boasted, "I've already copied all the blueprints and the entire client database onto a personal drive," he continued, his voice full of an arrogant pride that made my skin crawl. "After this deal, we will have more than enough money to disappear. We'll be on a beach, and she'll be left holding the smoking ruins of her precious company." Chloe shrieked with delight, grabbing her own champagne flute and raising it. "To our future," she toasted, "and to Lydia's. Well, to her." They clinked glasses, drinking to my destruction. They were dancing on a grave they thought was mine. But I knew, in that moment, it was their own. A sudden gust of wind from a partially open window rustled the curtains near me. Chloe's head snapped in my direction, her eyes wide. I held my breath, shrinking deeper into the shadows of the screen, my pulse hammering in my throat. "What was that?" she asked, her voice losing its confidence. "Did you hear something?" Gavin waved a dismissive hand, already pouring himself another drink. "It's just the wind, baby. We're on the 45th floor. No one is here but us. We are perfectly, absolutely safe." His blind, idiotic confidence was the final nail. He had just dug his own grave. It was time for me to step into the light. I slid the phone back into my pocket, the recording secure. I took one deep, steadying breath, straightened the collar of my coat, and stepped out from behind the screen. The sound of my boot heels clicking on the hardwood floor was unnaturally loud, a slow, deliberate cadence that hammered against the silence of the room. The music and laughter had died. The wind on this floor really is strong, isn't it, Gavin? My voice was calm, cold, and it sliced through the atmosphere. They both spun around as if they had been struck by lightning. Gavin's hand flew up in shock, the whiskey glass slipping from his fingers. It shattered on the floor, the dark liquid splashing across the wood like a pool of blood. Chloe let out a short, terrified shriek and scrambled for his shirt, pulling it against her chest to cover her body. Her face, moments before flushed with pleasure, was now a mask of waxy, white terror. Gavin's eyes were wide, the pupils dilated in disbelief. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "Lydia," he stammered, his voice cracking. "What?" "You are supposed to be on a plane." I advanced further into the room, my gaze locked on his. I felt no fear, only a profound Arctic calm. "The flight's been permanently delayed, darling," I said, allowing a small, sharp smile to touch my lips. "And thank you for throwing this little welcome home party for me. You even hosted it in my building." I let the words "my building" hang in the air, my eyes scanning the room with open, theatrical contempt, as if inspecting a dumpster fire. Gavin's mind was clearly racing, trying to catch up. He visibly tried to pull himself together, stepping slightly in front of Chloe in a pathetic, instinctual gesture of protection. He held up his hands, palms out. "Lydia, just listen to me. You have to let me explain. This isn't what it looks like. It's just a misunderstanding." The lie was so absurd, so insulting that I laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "A misunderstanding," I repeated, stopping a few yards from him. "Which part is the misunderstanding?" "Gavin, the part where you are sleeping with a 22-year-old intern, or the part where you're planning to sell my company's data to our biggest competitor tomorrow?" The mention of the data sale made the color drain from his face. It went from pale to a sickly, grayish white. He understood, in that instant, that I had heard everything. The fear in his eyes instantly curdled into the desperate rage of a cornered animal. "You were spying on me," he roared, his voice suddenly strong again, fueled by panic. "That is an invasion of my privacy. You have no right to be here." "Privacy?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "What privacy do you have in an apartment leased by my company, an apartment that is being paid for with my money? As a husband who signed a prenuptial agreement with a morality and fidelity clause so strict it could make a priest blush." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded document, a copy of the lease agreement, and threw it onto the coffee table. It landed on a half-empty champagne flute. "You seem to have forgotten the fine print. Gavin, you are not the tenant. You are merely a permitted signatory. Everything in this apartment, including that cheap intern you are hiding behind, belongs to me." Chloe, finally processing the scene, burst into loud, theatrical sobs. She was playing her last card, the damsel in distress. "Mrs. Thorne, I am so sorry." She wept. He told me you were separated. He said you did not love him anymore. He said—" I cut her off with a look. "Be quiet," I commanded, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You are not a victim here. You are an accomplice, and I assure you, the prison sentence for corporate espionage is significantly longer than the one for adultery." That was the breaking point. Seeing his last line of defense crumble, Gavin lunged at me. His face was a mask of primal fury. "Give me that phone," he screamed, his hand clawing for the pocket where he knew I kept it. I did not move. I did not even flinch. I stood my ground, locked his gaze, and issued my final challenge. Touch me, Gavin. I dare you. Do it. The security cameras in this hallway are streaming live to the building's central server. The second your fingers make contact with my body, it becomes assault. You will not just be escorted out of this building, you will leave it in handcuffs. He froze. His hand stopped, trembling just inches from my coat. He was trapped, suspended between his violent impulse and the cold, hard reality of his new powerlessness. He was finished, and he finally knew it. The air in the penthouse was stretched tight, a high-tension wire humming with what was left unsaid. The only sounds were Gavin's ragged breathing and Chloe's pathetic, sniffling sobs. I carefully stepped around the spreading pool of dark red wine, its stain creeping into the seams of the hardwood floor. I walked to the sleek work desk where Gavin's laptop was open and glowing. "So who were you planning to sell the East Coast project to?" I asked, my voice conversational, as if inquiring about the weather. I ran a finger along the trackpad. The screen flickered to life, displaying a half-written email in his drafts folder. The recipient and executive at Nova Corporation, our single greatest competitor. Nova, really. Gavin. How unoriginal. He remained silent, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped in his cheek. Beads of sweat had popped up on his forehead. He knew the game was over. Then, the silence broke, and a decade of his repressed resentment erupted. "You do not understand, Lydia," he hissed, his voice raw. "I have given 10 years of my life to your goddamn family. 10 years I worked like a dog for you, while you and your father sat in your ivory tower just pointing your fingers. I earned this. I deserve more than just the scraps you decided to throw me." "Contribution," I interrupted, the single word sharp enough to cut. I turned from the laptop to face him. "Is that what you call it? What contribution did you make when you embezzled from the employee charity fund to build your private golf course? Or was it your hard work when you inflated the construction material invoices by 40% for 3 years and pocketed the difference?" I let the accusations land, one by one. Each one was a fact I had personally uncovered during the last 6 months of my meticulous, secret investigation. With every charge I leveled, Gavin took a small, involuntary step backward until his back was pressed hard against the wall. Chloe's head snapped between us, her tear-streaked face a mask of horrified confusion. She looked at Gavin. "What? What is she talking about? You said you were the one in charge. You told me the company was yours." I let out a small, dry laugh. "You poor, stupid girl. He is not in charge. He is a puppet, a highly paid figurehead given a fancy title to keep him happy. And as of today, he is just an unemployed, indebted fool who is about to be sued into oblivion." I turned my full attention back to Gavin, my voice softening with a false, pitying tone. "Did you really think I did not know?" I asked, taking a step closer to him. "Did you think I would not notice the secret accounts you opened in the Caymans? Did you honestly believe I did not know that you leveraged the Hamptons house to the hilt to play the stock market, and that you lost every single cent of it 2 months ago? That was the final blow, the financial one, the one that stripped away the last veneer of his manhood." The strength went out of his legs. Gavin slid down the wall, his body collapsing in on itself until he was sitting in a heap on the floor. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The image of the powerful, arrogant man from 5 minutes ago was gone, replaced by this pathetic, broken shell. "Lydia, please," he whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. "Please, do not make this a public thing. We can make a deal. I will. I will end it with her. Right now. I will do anything you want. Anything." I looked down at him, at this creature on the floor, and the only thing I felt was a profound, nauseating disgust. This was the man I had shared my bed with. This was the man who held my hand at my father's gala. A coward. willing to bargain away his lover, his dignity, anything, just to save himself. "A deal?" I asked, my voice dripping with contempt. "You have nothing to deal with, Gavin. You are broke. You have no power, no money, and no leverage. But more importantly, you are morally bankrupt." As if on cue, a faint sound drifted in through the open window. It was a siren, faint at first, then growing louder, closer. It was not one siren, it was two. Gavin heard it. His head jerked up, his eyes wild with a new, more primal terror. I smiled, a cold, thin-lipped expression. "Oh, I forgot to mention," I said, checking my watch. "Before I came up here, I forwarded my entire file, the one on the corporate espionage, the embezzlement, all of it to my legal team and the Economic Crimes Division. They are very efficient. They should be in your lobby right about now." Gavin stared at me, his face completely drained of blood. It was the face of a man looking at his own executioner. Pure, unadulterated despair. The rapid, heavy pounding on the front door shattered the suffocating tension in the room. A commanding voice boomed through the thick wood, demanding entry. Police. "Open this door immediately!" Chloe let out a sharp, terrified shriek and curled into a tight ball on the sofa, shaking violently. Gavin sprang to his feet, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an escape route that did not exist. We were on the 45th floor. The only way out was the front door or a lethal drop from the balcony. I walked toward the entrance with a slow, deliberate calm, smoothing the front of my coat. Behind me, I heard Gavin scramble toward the bedroom, his footsteps heavy and desperate as he rushed to get his hands on the laptop and the external hard drive. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. A squad of uniformed officers and 2 men from my company's private security detail flooded into the apartment. The harsh flash of a forensic camera immediately began popping, illuminating the sordid disarray of the room in blinding bursts of white light, capturing the spilled wine and the discarded clothing for the official record. "Mrs. Thorne," the lead officer asked, nodding respectfully in my direction. "We received the digital dossier. The warrant for the arrest of Mr. Gavin Miller for embezzlement and grand larceny has been signed." I nodded back, my expression remaining completely impassive. I pointed a steady finger toward the master bedroom where the sounds of crashing objects could be heard. "He is in there," I said, my voice even. "He is attempting to destroy the evidence." 3 officers rushed past me into the suite. A moment later, the sounds of a struggle erupted, followed by shouting. Gavin was dragged out into the living room, kicking and thrashing. His expensive shirt was torn at the shoulder, and his face was flushed a deep, ugly red from a mix of exertion and humiliation. "Let go of me," he screamed, his voice cracking. "I am the vice president. This is a mistake, Lydia. Tell them to stop." He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, begging for a salvation he did not deserve. I stood with my arms crossed over my chest, watching him as if he were a stranger I had never met, feeling absolutely nothing. A female officer approached Chloe, who was still huddled on the couch. She ordered the girl to get dressed and produce her identification. Chloe began to wail, her mascara streaming down her cheeks in black rivulets. "I did not know anything," she cried between sobs. "I swear I did not know." "You can explain that at the station," the officer said coldly. The dream of becoming a wealthy trophy wife had evaporated in an instant, replaced by the looming threat of prison and a reputation that was now damaged beyond repair. As the officers shoved Gavin toward the door, he dug his heels into the carpet, forcing them to pause right in front of me. He was panting, his hair wild, hatred burning through the fear in his eyes. "How long," he hissed through his gritted teeth. "How long have you been planning this?" I leaned in close, invading his personal space one last time. I lowered my voice to a whisper that was meant only for him. "Since the day you bought that Cartier necklace. Gavin, I gave you months to confess, but you chose to sell me out instead. Goodbye." The officers yanked him forward, and the procession moved into the hallway. The sound of handcuffs clicking and heavy boots marching on the floor faded as the elevator doors slid shut. The penthouse fell silent again, but it was the silence of a battlefield after the fighting has ceased. I stood in the middle of the ruined living room, looking at the shards of the broken wine glass and the stains on the floor. I did not feel sad. I felt a profound, weightless sense of relief, the specific clarity of having a malignant tumor finally cut from my body. My phone rang in my pocket, the sharp sound cutting through the quiet. It was my father. He had undoubtedly heard the news from our legal department. I answered, my voice steady and strong. "It is done. Dad," I said. "I handled it. It is clean. I am calling an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Yes, I am fine. Honestly, I have never been better." I hung up the phone and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, the sun had set, and the city lights were beginning to flicker on, spreading out like a sea of diamonds in the darkness. The skyline stood tall and resilient, just like I was about to be. 1 week following the arrest, the scandal of Gavin Miller dominated the headlines of financial journals and tabloid websites alike. The photograph of him being led out of the Obsidian in handcuffs, head bowed and shirt torn, had become the defining symbol of corporate greed and hubris. The company stock wobbled slightly in the initial 48 hours, but it stabilized and then climbed as soon as I issued a press release declaring that I was assuming direct operational control and implementing a policy of absolute financial transparency. The market reacts well to strength, and I gave them plenty of it. My attorney, a woman of steel with a perfectly coiffed mane of silver hair, placed the unilateral divorce agreement on my mahogany desk. She tapped the document with a manicured fingernail, a look of professional satisfaction on her face. She explained that with the mountain of evidence I had provided, combined with the ironclad infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement, Gavin would be leaving the marriage with absolutely nothing. Furthermore, she informed me that the district attorney was pushing for a sentence of 5 to 10 years for the embezzlement charges. The man who wanted everything was about to lose the only thing he had left, his freedom. I signed the divorce papers with a stroke of the pen that felt decisive and heavy. The name Lydia Thorne looked different on the page now. It looked powerful. I realized I was not just divorcing a husband. I was firing an incompetent employee and removing a toxic liability from society. My lawyer mentioned that Gavin had tried to send me letters from the detention center, pages upon pages of apologies and begging. I did not even look at the envelopes. I instructed her to incinerate every single one of them unread. I had no interest in the fiction written by a desperate man. As for Chloe, the consequences were swift and brutal. She was immediately terminated from her position at the rival firm. Because news travels at the speed of light in our industry, she was effectively blacklisted. No reputable company would hire a known corporate spy and home wrecker. I heard through the grapevine that she had been forced to move back to her small hometown to live with her parents, carrying the weight of public humiliation. It was a steep price to pay, but it was the cost of trying to take a shortcut to the top by trampling on another woman's life. I decided to put the penthouse at the Obsidian on the market immediately. Technically, it was a prime asset, but it was stained by the memory of their betrayal. I wanted to scrub every trace of Gavin from my existence. I directed that the entire sum from the sale of the apartment be used to establish a scholarship fund for talented female architecture students from underprivileged backgrounds. It felt like the right kind of poetic justice to turn the sight of my pain into a foundation for another woman's future success. At the emergency shareholder meeting, I stood at the podium and looked down at the sea of faces. Many of them were men who had previously doubted my acumen, viewing me merely as the daughter of the chairman or the wife of the charming Gavin Miller. I presented a ruthless restructuring plan, systematically removing every single person Gavin had brought into the fold. My delivery was crisp, my strategy was sound, and my confidence was unshakable. By the time I finished, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. They were no longer looking at a wife or a daughter. They were looking at a leader. When I returned home, I began the physical purge. I went through the master suite and pulled every single one of Gavin's belongings from the closets. His Italian suits, his silk ties, his handmade shoes. I threw them all into heavy black trash bags. I did not sell them. I donated them to a charity for job seekers. I had the bedroom repainted the next day, changing the color scheme entirely. I replaced the furniture, turning the space we had shared into a sanctuary that was mine alone. Every item I threw away felt like a weight being lifted off my shoulders. That evening, I sat alone in my newly designed living room. I opened a bottle of vintage Cabernet, the kind Gavin had always forbidden me to open because he claimed it was too expensive to waste on a quiet night at home. I poured a glass and took a slow sip. The wine was rich and complex, but the most distinct flavor was the taste of freedom. I looked around the quiet house. I was not lonely. I was enjoying the exquisite pleasure of absolute independence. There were no more lies, no more anxiety, and no more pretending. There was just me, my glass of wine, and the empire that was fully, finally mine. This morning, on the 10th day, I woke up. This was the day I was originally scheduled to return from Paris. I did not wake to the groggy, disorienting exhaustion of a long-haul flight, but to the deep, refreshing clarity that comes from a sound sleep. The sunlight that filled my bedroom was not the artificial, stage-lit glare from that final morning with Gavin. This light was brilliant, warm, and real. I walked onto the balcony and took a deep, clean breath, filling my lungs with the air of my new life. I drove to the airport, but I was not catching a flight, and I was not leaving. I was there to meet someone very important, not a business partner, not a new lover, but the person I had been 10 years ago. I stood in the arrivals hall, watching the passengers stream out from their gates, and I pictured her the younger, more trusting Lydia, the one who had walked into a marriage with an open heart. I smiled at her in my mind. I whispered an apology for letting her endure so much for so long, and I made her a silent promise that no one would ever harm her again. As I stood there, a notification lit up my phone. It was an alert from my bank. The last of Gavin's frozen assets had been liquidated to pay the damages owed to the company. He was now, officially, bankrupt. A moment later, a news alert popped up. His trial date had been set for next month. The evidence, the article said, was overwhelming and irrefutable. The sharp, hot satisfaction of revenge had faded. In its place was the cool, quiet peace of justice having been fully served. A new email arrived. It was from the Ritz in Paris. They were writing to inform me that, as I had failed to check in, my reservation had been canceled. However, as a gesture of goodwill, they were keeping the prepaid spa package on file for me for 1 year. I laughed out loud in the middle of the terminal. Paris was still there. The Seine was still flowing. I did not need Gavin or any man to give me a ticket. I could go whenever I wanted, on my own dime, and with my own wings. I left the airport and drove out of the city, heading toward the coast. I drove to the small, weathered cottage my grandmother had left me, the one place Gavin had never set foot in, claiming it was too rustic. The ocean stretched out before me, a vast, unbroken expanse of blue. The sound of the waves crashing on the sand was the sound of freedom. I slipped off my shoes and walked barefoot on the damp sand, feeling the cold, rough ground beneath my feet. This was real. This was the present, and it was more beautiful than any dream. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my diamond wedding ring. The stone, a flawless 5 carats, glittered in the sun like a crystallized tear. It had once been a symbol of an eternal promise. Now, it was just a cold, metal shackle. I resisted the urge to throw it into the ocean. That felt too dramatic, too cliched, and frankly, too wasteful. Instead, I slid it back into my pocket. I would sell it. I would take the money and use it to fund the first round of investment for a female-led tech startup. I would turn this symbol of my greatest failure into the seed of another woman's success. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message from the lead architect on our new project in Tokyo. The text was simple. "We have a structural problem. We need you here. Lydia, your call." I typed back immediately, my fingers steady on the screen. "Book my flight. The earliest one you can find tomorrow. One way." I was not running away. I was running toward. The whole world was waiting, and I was, for the first time in my life, completely ready. I stood on the shore, turned my face to the wind, and spread my arms wide, my hair whipping around my face. I was no longer Mrs. Thorne, the wife of a charismatic fraud. I was Lydia. Just Lydia. And that was more than enough. I turned my back to the ocean and walked toward my car, leaving a set of footprints in the sand that the tide would soon wash away, just as my memory of Gavin would be scoured from the bright, bold life that lay ahead. I smiled, started the engine, and drove toward the horizon, where the sun was high and the road was wide open. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and let us all connect. Remember to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.